Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digi Finance video. So today I'm going to be focusing more on the English market, and I'm going to be taking a look at what we can gather from a lot of the pre-sale data that we have currently available on TCG Player. So this only applies to the English US market because that's primarily what TCG Player participates in. But regardless, it's still very interesting to see the direction of the set and what people are currently valuing the set at, and it'll be interesting to see what the set is going to do and how it's going to perform in the long run. So this is just a good video to kind of like guesstimate where the set is going to go and end up on, and kind of inform you on what the secondary market is doing and what it should be performing and behaving like, especially since we already have two sets underneath us that we could take a look at that data and we could pull examples from that data to kind of predict and estimate where the market usually is going to be settling at. So on the world.digimon.card website is where we have the product description and information on what is going to be in the product, and on top of which the website also, if you go under the card list, you could see each of the individual cards and read them, so that way you're up to date and as informed as everyone else when it comes to what's going to be in the set. So hopping over to TCG Player, we could see that with BT04, they do have a couple of listings for both sealed product and singles. Right now, there's not a whole bunch of single sellers, just because, again, the way TCG Player works is you need to be an official shop in order to list anything on presale. So a single seller like me is not able to list anything because I am not an official shop. But we could see that there's just not a whole lot of listings up, so there's not a whole lot of competition right now in terms of how the secondary market is behaving. But it only makes sense that there's not going to be a whole lot of sellers right now, just because, again, the way Digimon has worked for the past two sets is stores have had gotten supply issues just because of the current state of the pandemic. But regardless of the supply issues, stores have gotten their allocations cut, so it would only be natural for them to not exactly want to list what they are expecting to get, just because what they're expecting and what they might actually end up getting are going to be two completely different things, or could be, so they don't want to be in the hot seat and list something that they don't have, just because, again, they don't know exactly what they're going to be getting until they get it on their doorstep. And usually they'll only get it a couple of days before the set releases. So it only makes sense that there's just not going to be a whole lot of sellers right now listing, just because nobody knows exactly what they're going to be getting. So I would always be very cautious when buying anything on presale for the Digimon card game, just because of that factor alone. But even with the allocation numbers unknown to basically all of the shops, it still hasn't stopped them from listing any product anyway. But the one big thing that we don't know about BT04 is going to be the pull rates. So we kind of can guesstimate what the pull rates are going to be based on the information we have from Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5. So theoretically, we have an idea, but we don't know if there's any changes because this is the first main set and this isn't a special combined set. So again, we don't even know what the exact pull rates are. So it's kind of hard to guesstimate what a card is going to be valued at when we don't know the prevalence of how often we're going to be seeing that card. But I am going to be going into this assuming that there is no change to the pull rates. So what we could reasonably expect to see based on, again, the information we have from Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5 is we're probably going to be seeing 7 SRs and then 2 hits. And the hits are going to be either an alt art card or a secret rare. So I'm going to be going into this assuming that that is going to be the same type of pull rate that we're going to be seeing in BT04. So as we see, we could scroll down and take a look at some of the singles prices that are currently listed up by the 1 to 2 shops that are actually currently listing. And to no surprise, a lot of these prices, at least to me, look really overpriced. So what I mean by they look really overpriced is I don't think, based on all of the information we know, that these are going to be where the card's prices are going to be settling at. So when I say a card is overpriced, I'm just comparing it to the price that I would probably value it myself and where the market would probably end up settling the card at based on its prevalence, based on the pull rate. So there's a lot of like asterisks to what cards are actually worth because there's a lot of information we still don't know. But based on what we do know, I can safely assume that a lot of these cards' prices are indeed overpriced. So I would definitely not buy any of these cards, maybe a couple with a few exceptions, but like outside of those exceptions, I do think that a lot of these cards are overpriced and probably not what they're going to end up being in the long run. So the data that I can pull from that is making me think that these cards are overpriced is, again, looking back at what we previously had and how they've been performing. So as we can see with the product description of BT04, we know the exact quantities of the different rarities, and we know the exact cards of those rarities, and we even know how those cards are going to be performing, at least on a base level, because of the information we have from Japan. Granted, ours is going to be a little bit different because these 6 promo cards that we're going to be getting in our BT04 format is going to warp and change how the BT04 format is going to be played, but outside of these 6 cards being added into our BT04 format, we still can get a good estimate on how a lot of the cards are going to be performing. And the closest comparison that we have to this is actually in Special Booster 1.5. So Special Booster 1.5 is the closest comparison that we have, so I'm going to be utilizing a lot of how the Special Booster 1.5 cards have been behaving to dictate what I think that BT04 cards should be valued at. So hopping back over to TCG Player, we could still see some similar trends and patterns in how Special Booster 1.0 and Special Booster 1.5 have been behaving like. So obviously we could see that the highly played Alt Art SRs and Alt Art Secret Rares and Secret Rares are going to be the cards with the most value. But if we start scrolling down, we could see some very similar trends in how other Secret Rares, Alt Arts, and SRs are going to be performing. So we could see that it looks like the average super rare alt art card is going to be around that $15 to $30 price range, all depending on the SR in question. And then we could see that it looks like the average secret rare card is going to be valued at around that $10 to $30 range. Again, all depending on the secret rare in question. And we could continue to scroll to see how the average SR is going to be performing, and it looks like the more we scroll, the more we'll get a bigger picture of a SR performing anywhere around $3 to $15. So this is based on the pull rates and ratios and quantities that we currently have in the game, so we could reasonably expect that BT04 isn't going to be performing that much different than what we currently have already. And then the rares kind of follow their own rules on top of box toppers and dash pack cards, but we could see that it looks like the average rare top end is going to be at about $9, $10-ish, and then if we just continue to keep scrolling, we could see that it looks like a lot of them bottom out at around 10 cents on average. So we could utilize what we currently know about Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5, again, all assuming BT04 is going to be performing the same, to kind of break down what cards should be worth. So here I've created just a very rough draft of a scale on how I would go about evaluating what a card is worth, all depending on its pull rate prevalence and its playability and popularity. So we could see that the average secret rare is going to be about on the low end 50, on the high end 80, with them averaging out for like their basic usability being around that $30 to $40 price range. Then we could see the SRs, the bottom ones will generally go for about like $1 to $2. So I was just being a little generous and I rounded it up to $3. But we could also see that it looks like they average out to be at around $10 to $15, with the highest of the highs being at around $30, but these are some very rare and special cases. And then we could see that with the rares, as you just saw, they'll go for as low as like an average of 10 cents to about as high as $10 on the highest end. And then the uncommons and commons kind of do something similar, where they'll just usually go for a low of 10 cents, and then they'll go for like $1 or $2. So utilizing what we could gather from Special Booster, I created this chart, and applying this chart to what we know in BT04, we could then kind of guesstimate and see what the prices of BT04 cards should be. But before we get back into TCG Player and rip some of the singles prices apart, I definitely think it is important to understand to relook at the rarity of the cards. So we could see that the secret rares in comparison to the closest example with Special Booster 1.5, the secret rares are going to have about the same pull prevalency, and I think the alt arts are also going to have the same type of pull prevalency as well. But we could see that the super rare count for BT04 is a total of 2 cards higher than Special Booster 1.5, so it's going to be just a smidge harder to pull the exact cards that you need, but you should still have a reasonably high chance of pulling anything that you need. So I would probably say if the pull rates are the exact same, then you'll have about a 50-50 on any given SR in the set, and that's still just pretty decent odds. And then on top of which, we could take a look at the rares. There's going to be less overall rares in BT04 than there are in Special Booster 1.5, and the same is true about uncommons and commons, with just overall less of them. So that means with the lesser degrees, we definitely can have a higher chance of seeing any of the given ones. So the overall prices of any given common, uncommon, and rare should be a lot lower than they are in Special Booster 1.5. So now with all of this information that we know about Special Booster 1.0, Special Booster 1.5, and their market trends, on top of the guesstimation work that we could apply into their pull rates, we could now finally assess what cards should be accurately priced at in BT04. So now we could finally get into the meat of the video, talking about how overpriced some of these pre-sale cards are and what we could reasonably expect BT04 cards to be behaving like. So starting with Lucimon, I definitely think Lucimon being around that $85 range is probably about accurate, considering the closest comparison that we have to it is going to be in Omnimon Alter S. Granted, Omnimon Alter S isn't necessarily the best comparison because Omnimon Alter S definitely has a lot more playability and flexibility. So if we kind of just take the average between the two, we get around that $80-$85 price range between Beelzemon's alt art, which I definitely think is another really good comparison to bounce off of. So going again between the two, I think $80 to $85 is about correct for this, and I definitely think it's going to be one of the most, if not the most expensive card in the set. As far as War Greymon, it's really hard to lock down certain super rares alternate art prices just because they could fluctuate quite rapidly and wildly. So I do think if we take it into the best example of Lilithmon, War Greymon, and Shine Greymon, we definitely between the four can kind of like paint a little bit of a picture on where that card's price actually is going to be. I definitely think between all of them, it's probably going to be more around the average of these three rather than Shine Greymon, just because I definitely think between its popularity and playability, it's probably going to hold a slightly higher price than what Shine Greymon was holding. So I definitely think anywhere between $60 to like $80 is probably reasonable for the alt-art War Greymon. In terms of the Ancient Garurumon and Ancient Greymon, I definitely don't think these are $60 cards. So if we take the closest comparison, which is going to be Beelzemon, Metal Greymon, and Black War Greymon, it's probably going to perform more around the Metal Greymon in terms of the alt art price, where it's a relatively played card, but it's played in more specific decks. So I definitely think that they both are probably going to be around that $40 to $50 price range, just because they are more specific cards. Next, moving on to Chaosmon Volderarm, the closest example we have to Chaosmon Volderarm is going to be something like the original Omnimon, but the original Omnimon has been cooling off in price lately, and he's already at about that $70 price range. So the big thing that's what is making Omnimon's price so high is the fact that he actually is a harder card to pull. So Omnimon being a 1 in 20 definitely makes him a lot harder to pull, which would definitely help drive his price up on top of his demand. So if we could assume that Chaosmon is going to have a similar level demand but a overall higher supply, just because Chaosmon Volderarm is a 1 in 12, means that he definitely is going to be holding a lower price tag. Currently he technically is, but because he is a 1 in 12, he's probably going to dip all the way down to around $40 to $50, and I think that's probably a little bit more reasonable for the card, but I wouldn't be surprised if this card goes as low as $30. Now, as far as the War Greymon in the set, I definitely do not think this is is a $50 card. Even though he is a very highly played and popular card, and he does have some legs all the way up into BT05, I still don't think that this is a $50 card. So the closest example that we have to War Greymon is actually going to be in Shine Greymon, and as we could see what Shine Greymon has been performing like, he hasn't been performing that great recently, so he's dipped all the way down to like $12-13. So we could reasonably expect with a slightly harder pull rate and just as much popularity, he's probably reasonably going to be around that $15 to $20 range. In terms of what the normal base art Lucimon is doing, if the alt art is already going to be this high, I don't think that the base rarity is going to be this high. Even though the secret rare pull rates are the same, it just doesn't have that same level of playability as Omnimon does, so I just don't see this card being $70. Again, I see this card being more around that $50 to $60 price range, just because it's still a very playable card for a lot of different decks. It's just, again, not Omnimon level played. In terms of Dan Devimon's alt art, again, it's really hard to guesstimate what the alt arts are going to be doing just because they can swing so rapidly and so crazily. So it's really hard to think what this card's actually going to be doing. So I'm just going to make a safe bet that this card is going to be around the $30 to $50 price range, just because the attention on him is even more prevalent now than it was in Japan's meta, just because we actually have the Devimon promo to be playing around with. That really makes his deck popular and powerful, on top of which he's still just a relatively decent card to be playing around with in a Mega Zoo style of deck. So he's just a relatively good card to be playing around with, thus probably holding around that high-end $30 to $50 price range. Next on to Beowulfmon. I definitely don't think Beowulfmon is worth $35. This card barely sees play in Japan as is. He's still a very popular and very powerful card, don't get me wrong. I just don't see him with a 1 in 12 pull rate, and Shine Greymon being the strongest card in Special Booster 1.5, I just don't see this card being a $35 card. Realistically, this card's probably going to be more around that $8 to $10 range, and I could even see Beowulfmon dipping as low as $5. In terms of the other Ancients, again, we have the base arts for Ancient Garurumon and Ancient Greymon, and I definitely don't think these are $30. They could be on the highest end $30, but reasonably when everything is said and done and there's just a whole bunch more cards into the market, I don't think these are going to be $30. This definitely seems more like a $15 to $25 card, because again, the closest example that we have is like Black War Greymon, the Secret Rare Vidramon, and the Secret Rare Metal Greymon, and those are the closest examples that we have. I mean, we could pull from Beelzemon, but like Beelzemon has a level of popularity to him that just makes him a lot higher in demand, but reasonably in terms of playability, we could expect it more around Metal Greymon's level of playability, so having him already be about $18 to $20 just means that these should probably be around that price as well. In terms of what Plutomon is doing, and basically any given SR from this point forward, I just don't see them being higher than $15. There's no reasonable way that we can visually see, based on all of the other cards with higher pull rates and less prevalence and less probably overall market, we could see that a lot of these cards are averaging about 20 on the high end for like SRs to about like 8 on the low end. So we could reasonably expect that a lot of these cards are going to be doing the same, and their alt arts are probably going to be following and mirroring what their normal prices are, just going to be slightly higher. So we could just utilize all of the information we have from here to just apply that this is probably not going to be $26. He's probably going to be about 10. Aldamon's probably going to be about 5. Rise is probably going to be about 15. Dan Devi's probably going to be about 15. Gogemon's probably going to be about 8. If he's already at 10, he might even dip to 5. Blastmon's probably going to be about 5. Ninhogmon alt art, this is probably a really interesting one. The fact that it hasn't even sold at 65, even on pre-release, means that this card already isn't worth 65. So this is probably going to realistically be more around that $40 to $50 range. I would think he could go even lower, but I would probably say 40 to 50 is safe on him. Blastmon's alt art, again, if he's already not selling at 30, then he's probably going to be even lower. So if his base art is already at 10, the alt art is probably going to be at around 15 if he's going to bellow out at about 8 to 5. I could see Lilamon being a relatively decent one just because she does have a lot of legs in popularity, but the fact that she hasn't sold yet at 45 means she's realistically probably going to be less than 45, so she's probably going to be around that $20 range realistically. I could see her going as high as 30. Nidhoggmon, again, hasn't even sold at 27, so realistically, based on all of the pull prevalency in the set, he's realistically going to be around that 15 to 10 price range, and so on and so forth between a lot of the other SRs. And the alt arts, again, are just a little bit harder to judge, but again, if a lot of these haven't even sold at their current prices, means that they're only going to be lower, especially with more sellers going to be entering the market once the set actually releases. And then taking a look at what the rares and box toppers are going to be doing, Chaosmon, his normal alt art going to be around 50. I could reasonably see that. I could also see him go a little bit lower. He's one of those cards where it's a little bit harder to judge considering the only closest comparison we have is Flower Cannon, but I'm not entirely sure what the prevalency of alt art cards is actually going to be between them all. So I could reasonably think that this card is going to be around that $40 to $60 price range. Marcus, on the other hand, being an alt art box topper, if we look at what all of the other box toppers have been doing, I do not think this is going to be 30. Don't get me wrong, he's still a very good and highly played card, and a lot of people are really big Marcus fans, but again, I don't think 30 is reasonably good for where this card is going to be settling at. So if we look at a lot of the other box topper tamers, I'd probably say he's going to be more closer to Tai and Tai, where it's like a lot of these are around the $20 price range, but again, like a lot of these alt art box toppers right now are only so high just because these are tamers, so they're already highly played cards, and Special Booster 1.0, it's harder to pull any given tamer that you want. So you had like, what, a 1 in 10 chance on pulling the tamer you want, if not more, versus a 1 in 6. So I definitely think just between the differences that this card is probably going to be more around that $10 price range. I definitely think Izzy is probably going to also be lower than the $20 he's currently listed at. So again, applying that same type of logic, he's probably realistically going to be around that 10 to 5 price range. And then Marcus, Kari, and Tai, and Yoshino are all going to follow that same type of pattern where they're just not even going to be 15 just because these are already the lower played ones. So that just means that they're going to be in lower overall demand. So they're probably just going to settle at around $5 each, if the closest comparison is like Sora, Matt, and Izzy. So they're definitely not going to hold their price the way they are. As far as Chaosmon being the biggest rare in the set, that I definitely wholeheartedly agree. He was base listed at 10 by PPG, and then PPG sold out of him initially at 10, and then he shot up to 15, relisted by PPG. I don't know why they didn't just make him 15 to begin with, or how they just sold out and then were able to relist when, again, they don't know any of their information, but as we could see, he is in competition with PPG and one other seller, so they are kind of just starting to undercut, and that's kind of how the secondary market on TCG Player works, is a race to the bottom. But already the fact that he's selling for 10 probably means that he's probably going to stay around 10, so that's going to be the safest bet on how much Chaosmon's actually worth, because again, if we have a good comparison to pull from in the form of the other highly played rares, which would be like TK and Vmon, those are really close to $10, and the fact that he is a level 7 means that he has a lot more playability versus those, and even though he does have an overall higher prevalency rate, that probably is going to be outweighed by his demand, so I could still see him being about 10. As far as War Growlmon, I definitely think that War Growlmon and basically everything underneath him is going to start dipping. Granted, he's probably going to be around that 7, 6, 5 price range, and then everything under him is basically going to be a lot lower, just because if we take a look at a lot of these rares really aren't doing anything. Like Trump Sword is already $4, so if we apply that type of a logic to something like Hell's Gate, then Hell's Gate should be about $4. So the rares overall are a little bit harder to predict what they're going to be doing, but regardless, what they have listed here is already way too high of a price. And that's kind of the point, is to show that a lot of the pre-sale is just trying to take advantage of the fear of missing out to make sure that you try to lock it in, and they're only charging a premium because they're the only ones that have things listed, so they're the only ones that can take advantage of the situation. So I definitely would advise against pre-sale. For the most part, there are a couple of cards, as I pointed out, where there probably are fairly priced, or they could even go up in price. But again, if we look at Special Booster 1.0 and Special Booster 1.5 and how their markets have been settling in terms of the secondary market, they've been settling relatively nicely, and a lot of these cards definitely should be lower priced than what they are, based on everything that we know about Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5 as a whole. Again, all assuming that pull rates have not changed compared to those sets. And then I'm not really going to touch on sealed product, considering we already know that the sealed product is already way more expensive than it should be, considering all the way back in October, when people were taking orders for Special Booster 1.0 on pre-sale. Those were selling for about anywhere between $75 to $90. So reasonably, that's what the price of a booster box should be. But given the current times and the state of the pandemic, this is just what sealed product is currently. But just as a quick little aside, I do think we are in a little bit of an unhealthy mindset, considering a lot of us think that the MSRP of a booster box is the amount of packs times by the MSRP of a pack, when that's not exactly true. Booster boxes don't have MSRPs. The MSRP of a pack is for big box sellers like Walmart, Target, GameStop, etc., and that does not actually influence how much a booster box is actually worth. The market is how the booster box is actually worth, and based on how much the stores buy them from distributors and what distributors are selling at, that's the main influencing factor on what the price of a booster box is currently worth. So people parading that the MSRP of a booster box is this number times this is doing everyone a disservice, because that's basically the same thing as telling stores that it is okay for us to be paying the MSRP of a booster pack for the whole booster box, when that's not exactly true or how it should be done. So at most, booster boxes should be worth that, because this logic applies to if you were going to buy the amount of packs for a booster box at like the big box stores. So that's the most I would ever feel comfortable paying for a booster box. But again, getting into this mindset isn't very healthy, because stores, even post-pandemic, will say, okay, you were okay with doing this before, so you should be okay with continuing to do it now, when, again, we know that they could be selling them for a lot lower, and they should reasonably be selling them for a lot lower. It's just right now, with the supply issues caused by the pandemic, that's just the unfortunate outcome of what is going on. Take everything I said in this video with a ginormous grain of salt, because I am not a financial expert. I am just a very active participant in the secondary market. So this is just me giving my general advice, the best to my abilities, to you, so that way you could be as informed as you possibly can when making your purchasing decisions. But again, I am not a financial expert. And at the end of the day, you need to evaluate what's worth it to you, and that's what you should be going off of. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comment section below. And down in the description below will also be my TCG Player affiliate link. So if you want to help support me in the channel, then whenever you use that link to buy cards off of tcgplayer.com, then some of that money will go to supporting me in the channel. And then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.